I was home from college, standing in my Aunt May's kitchen, when we got the news that my cousin Cedric had been sentenced to 24 years in prison. Cedric and I had grown up close, like siblings. I was devastated. I thought about how old we would both be when he was released. I was 19, he was 20. He would be 44 years old. Do you know how old 44 sounds to a 19-year-old? They might as well have said 50 or senior citizen, because that's what I heard. I thought about the trips we could have taken, all the special occasions and holidays that he would miss with our family, the partying that we could have done in our 20s. I thought about his young kids, the graduations that he would miss, the birthdays where he wouldn't be present, how he wouldn't be there to tuck them in at night or to teach them how to drive, attend sporting events. He wouldn't be there to take them to the movies or to hear about their first dates. His kids would grow up without a father. When he would be released, his kids would be able to vote and also drink legally. I thought about his sister without the presence of her brother around. I thought about his mom, my aunt, without the security of her son around. Even at that age, I had aspired to become an attorney. And at that moment, I wished that I had already done that so I could have helped him. But I was just starting my junior year at the College of William & Mary. Cedric and I grew up in Richmond, Virginia, in the 80s and 90s, when Richmond was the murder capital of the US, during the crack cocaine epidemic, the age of mandatory minimums that separated and destroyed so many Black families in my community. And just growing up in this environment, as a kid, I would hear gunshots ringing out as I tried to fall asleep. While most middle-class and upper-middle-class families decided to move to the suburbs, my family made the decision to stay in Richmond, in the inner city, in Churchill, where my father's family lived for generations. Growing up, I knew when to turn my gaze or to look down when I saw a drug deal happening on the corner in broad daylight right across the street from my house. That was my home life, and it was very different from the tree-lined sidewalks and pristine streets in the neighborhood that surrounded the school that I attended in the west end of Richmond, only 10 minutes away from where I lived. So by day, I was wearing a plaid skirt, brown tie-up shoes, a white Oxford shirt, learning Latin, reading the Odyssey, also visiting the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts, which was located right down the street from my school. In the evenings, I was back home, sometimes doing duck drills, where my mom would yell, "Duck!" And my brother and I would drop to the floor to practice, just in case bullets rang out through the neighborhood. I never witnessed a police chase in the West End, but one day, as I was parking my car after school, I saw a man come barreling down the sidewalk with a police officer trailing very closely behind him. I still remember the look of fear in my mother's eyes as she stood at the front door while the police officer pulled out his weapon, ordered the man to get on the ground and cuff him. And this all happened 5 yards away from me. And I stood there frozen in my tracks until I felt safe to go inside. As a kid, I knew that there was a difference in the community where I lived and the community where I went to school. And I thought it was so unfair that so many Black kids and families in my community were living in poverty, struggling to make ends meet. Whereas in the predominantly white neighborhood 10 minutes away from me, parents had the means to take their kids on spring break trips. They also played basketball and tennis on courts, clean and well-maintained courts with nets. Imagine that. In my neighborhood, it was a metal rim with a hoop on concrete courts. And I resolved as a kid that I would continue my education, I would come back to my community, and I would advocate and fight for equality and justice. My parents tried to shelter my brother and me from the lifestyle that permeated our culture of fast money, nice cars, designer shoes, and clothes. But it permeated our culture. And I understood from a very young age, as I got older, I realized that what I saw in my neighborhood, where I lived and where I attended school, was inequality. it was a result of decades of discriminatory policies like redlining, like constructing a highway directly through Jackson Ward, essentially destroying a Black mecca of excellence, arts, and culture, of constructing public housing communities, at least 5 of them, within a 1-mile radius in the city, probably the largest concentration of public housing in the United States, along Interstate 95, Highway 64, with exhaust from cars and trucks polluting those neighborhoods for decades, with no grocery stores, no decent healthcare facilities. And as I thought about my neighborhood, I understood that these policies were designed to keep our neighborhoods and our schools segregated. But we couldn't call it segregation because obviously that was illegal. But they were designed to concentrate poverty in one area of the city. The lifestyle that I mentioned that permeated our culture ended up in me visiting my cousin Cedric in correctional facilities throughout Virginia during his sentence, with my heart aching every time I had to leave him. But with each visit, I noticed that Cedric blossomed and matured into a man. He read a ton of books. He obtained his associate's degree. He pursued a trade as an electrician. The Department of Corrections also tapped him to mentor young men entering the facility. And I felt inspired by that every time I left. Cedric was released a few years ago. He is now back home with our family. He's home for special occasions and on the holidays. He attended my swearing-in ceremony in January in the House chamber at the state capitol. And he mentioned that he would often watch legislators debate laws in the House chamber on TV while he was incarcerated, and how surreal it was that he was standing there. He is home mentoring youth. He also plans to go back to the correctional facility where he was to mentor young men who are still there. As for me, I have dedicated myself to a life of public service, to fighting for equality and justice that still eludes so many Black and brown communities. In 2020, Virginia had one of the highest incarceration rates in the United States. The number decreased between 2021 and 2022 thanks to criminal justice reform legislation passed by the General Assembly, namely earned sentence credits and probation reform. As of 2023, Virginia still ranks in the top 10 of highest incarceration rates in the United States. We come in at number 9. 43% of people in jails and 53% of people in prisons are Black, although Black people only make up 20% of Virginia's population. Black youth make up 20% of Virginia's population, but account for 43% of juvenile intakes and 56% of detainments. With numbers this disproportionate, it is incumbent on us to figure out why mass incarceration has continued in our Black communities for such a long time. It's not that Black people are more naturally inclined or predisposed to commit crimes. There have to be other factors at play. I think one of those factors is that Virginia incarcerates people long past the time when it is productive to do so. The Commonwealth spends roughly $1.5 billion every year incarcerating people. That's a lot of money. Take that in. And so the Department of Corrections mission that is stated on their website is effective incarceration, supervision, and evidence-based reentry services. The website also lists a value of service, and the department states that they serve individuals by encouraging them to be their best selves through humility, unity, passion, commitment, and thankfulness. So what this mission and value of service suggests to me is that our corrections framework is intended to rehabilitate, not to continue to incarcerate people beyond the point at which they would be productive residents in their communities. And my cousin Cedric is the perfect example of how productivity can look when we focus on rehabilitation, education, workforce development in our prisons, and when we believe in second chances. And so while the General Assembly has done a lot of work to address mass incarceration, there are still people who need our help who were sentenced under draconian mandatory minimum laws here in the Commonwealth, like Harry Justice Trainum. Justice was sentenced at the age of 19 to 64 years in prison for first-degree murder for being the driver in a drive-by shooting. He did not pull the trigger, and he maintains that he was driving his friend opened fire, and unfortunately killed someone. Justice has been, again, in prison since he was 19. He has served 29 years. He's now 48 years old, and he still has 35 years left on his sentence. Justice says that education was the catalyst of change for him. He now teaches college-level courses. He also facilitates or co-facilitates 5 Department of Corrections mentorship programs, 2 of which he developed, led, and refined himself. Imagine the good that Justice could be doing if he were back home in his community. I have a stack of letters from people who have stories like Justice, who have rehabilitated themselves, who could be back with their families, working in their communities, contributing to their local economies, back home mentoring youth, like Rodney Roan, who at 18 years old was sentenced to 20 years in prison for second-degree murder for a gun in his possession going off and accidentally killing someone. Rodney has been home back in Richmond for 3 years. He is now a successful personal trainer and business owner. He also mentors at-risk youth in Gilpin Court, where he was raised. Rodney says prison can make you worse or it can make you better, and he chose the better route. The second factor that I think we need to take a really hard look at are the continued inequalities in our community, the poverty that often, not always, but often results in people turning to the streets. Imagine a young kid named Gary. Gary is 15 years old. Gary lives in the same concentration of public housing communities that have existed in the city of Richmond since I was a kid, namely Gilpin Court. And he has moved from one public housing community to another with his family for the last 3 generations, so starting with his great-grandmother. Gary lives in a concrete box in a unit that was built in the 1950s. It has not been updated since then. The heat and air conditioning often do not work, so he's cold in the winter, extremely hot in the summer. Who knows what environmental irritants like lead are behind the walls or course through the pipes that provide Gary's drinking water. There are no grocery stores in Gary's neighborhood, so he gets his nutrition from snacks that he gets from the corner store and also from the free lunches that he gets at school, which are still all typically processed foods that do not provide the nutrition that a young man like Gary needs. He also attends school in a building that was built in the 1950s with mold in the ceilings. He might see a mouse running down the hallways here and there. And yet he's tired, undernourished, and we expect him to show up every day and be ready to learn. The only people who Gary sees in his neighborhood providing for him and his friends are the older guys who make their living selling drugs. Gary notices they have nice cars, they have nice sneakers. He decides he wants a pair of nice sneakers too, but he cannot afford them. His mom works 2 jobs, and he works a part-time job just to make ends meet. He doesn't know anything about financial planning or saving, but what he does know is that he can go out and steal some sneakers, he can go rob someone to get them, or he can sell drugs to buy the sneakers. While Gary is a fictional character, his experience is not. His experience is a compilation of all the stories that I have heard volunteering in my community, all the stories that I've heard from older men who turned to crime at a very young age. Now imagine a kid like me who grew up in a 2-parent household in a brick house with heat, with air conditioning, whose mom made breakfast for my brother and me every single morning before she took us to school, even if it was a piece of cheese or peanut butter on wheat bread toast, whose parents were there to pick us up every day after school and to make sure that we did our homework while they prepared dinner, who could drive to the grocery store to get fresh, healthy foods, who made sure that we could get to our doctors and our dentist appointments. I knew that if I wanted nice sneakers, I had 2 options. I could ask my parents, or I could save up money to go buy them. It is easier to make better choices when you have the resources or are surrounded by people who have the resources to do so. And we're talking basic needs, like a good education, clean and safe housing, fresh, healthy foods, health care, and parents who are able to be present. I'm not making excuses for Gary and the choices that he made or the choices that other people have made to turn to the streets, but I do understand why it could happen. And I think if you put yourself in their shoes, if you stood in the humanity of who they are, you would too. Thank you.